It doesn't echo the way you'd expect, not in these perfumed chambers, where roses float in marble fountains and golden light filters through latticed windows. The sound is muffled, intimate, as if the palace itself is trying to keep a secret. You're standing in the corridor outside the imperial harem, and you can smell jasmine mixed with something else, salt water, wet fabric, the metallic tang of fear. Guards move past you without meeting your eyes. They've been working since midnight, and their robes are soaked. In the courtyard beyond, the Bosphorus churns under a moonless sky, swallowing what it's been fed. By dawn, 300 women will have vanished from history, and the man who ordered their deaths will sleep soundly, believing he's purified his kingdom. Before we descend into this labyrinth of power and paranoia, drop a like. If you're fascinated by the hidden horrors of history, I'm constantly amazed that stories this dark, from so long ago, still grip us from every corner of the globe. The year is 1640, and something is broken at the heart of the Ottoman Empire. Not broken the way armies break against fortified walls, but broken the way a mind fractures after decades of isolation, terror, and the certain knowledge that each sunrise might be your last. Sultan Ibrahim I has just ascended to the throne, and within 8 years, he will transform the world's most powerful empire into a cautionary tale about what happens when absolute power meets absolute psychological collapse. But this isn't a story about politics or military campaigns. This is about desire twisted into something unrecognizable, about a man whose sexual obsessions will drain treasuries, destabilize governments, and culminate in one of history's most chilling mass murders. The truly disturbing part? The massacre was just the inevitable conclusion to a pattern that started the moment Ibrahim walked free from his prison. Because Ibrahim didn't simply take power, he escaped from the cafes The Cage, a windowless suite of rooms within Topkapi Palace, where Ottoman princes were held to prevent civil wars. He'd spent 22 years there, watching his brothers die one by one, executed by order of Sultan Murad IV to eliminate rival claimants to the throne. 3 brothers strangled. 3 funerals Ibrahim attended, knowing he was next. Every footstep in the corridor outside his door could be the executioner. Every servant who brought food might carry poison. For more than 2 decades, Ibrahim lived in a state of perpetual psychological torture, his entire existence reduced to waiting for death. When Murad finally died in 1640, Ibrahim was the last surviving male of the Ottoman dynasty. The empire faced an impossible choice: crown a man who'd been systematically broken by trauma, or end their own bloodline forever. The Grand Vizier found Ibrahim barricaded in his cell, refusing to come out. He was convinced it was a trap, that news of Murad's death was an elaborate ruse to lure him into the open for execution. It took hours of pleading and finally dragging Murad's corpse to Ibrahim's door before he believed the throne was truly his. When he emerged, he was 35 years old and had never known normal human interaction, political responsibility, or physical intimacy. The damage was immediately visible: recurring headaches, episodes where he'd simply disconnect from reality mid-conversation, physical tremors. Modern psychologists might recognize severe PTSD, dissociative disorders, paranoid tendencies. But in 1640, the Ottoman court just handed him absolute power over 50 million people and walked away. Ibrahim's mother, Kosem Sultan, made a calculated decision that would doom everything she'd worked to protect. Recognizing that her son was too psychologically fragile for governance, she encouraged him to focus on the one duty he could handle: producing heirs. The dynasty needed sons. Ibrahim needed distraction. The imperial harem became both solution and escape route. What happened next wasn't about dynastic responsibility. It was about a man trying to fill a void that couldn't be filled. Within months, Ibrahim had expanded the harem from its traditional 40 women to over 200. But the numbers alone don't capture what was happening inside those perfumed chambers. Ottoman treasury records, dry bureaucratic documents about expenditures, reveal something far more disturbing than simple promiscuity. Ibrahim sent procurement agents across 3 continents with increasingly specific instructions. Virgins with particular physical characteristics, specific ethnic backgrounds, certain personality traits. He was collecting human beings the way a damaged child might hoard objects, trying to build something that would make him feel safe, powerful, whole. The spending was staggering. Rare perfumes from Persia designed to enhance sexual experiences. Exotic foods from India believed to increase virility. Furniture specifically commissioned for elaborate, intimate encounters. And here, the palace chroniclers become deliberately vague, noting only that the designs required specialized craftsmen sworn to secrecy. The workshops received orders for silk restraints, jeweled accessories whose purpose could only be sexual, and mechanical devices the records refused to describe in detail. Then came the architectural modifications that revealed how deep Ibrahim's obsessions ran. Construction documents show the installation of hidden viewing chambers throughout the harem quarters, small spaces behind walls, where Ibrahim could watch his concubines without their knowledge. New rooms with specialized acoustics designed to amplify intimate sounds. Sections of the imperial gardens redesigned to include secluded areas where Ibrahim could stage what the records call theatrical presentations, elaborate sexual performances he directed, with the attention to detail of a military campaign. The women weren't partners. They were props in increasingly complex scenarios Ibrahim orchestrated to satisfy psychological needs he couldn't articulate. Court documents describe themed nights where concubines were required to dress as mythical creatures, historical figures from Ottoman literature, even religious icons in ways that bordered on blasphemy. These weren't costume parties. They were days-long psychological role-playing sessions where Ibrahim controlled every detail: what the women wore, said, how they moved, when they could eat or sleep. The line between sexual fantasy and psychological torture became impossible to distinguish. He developed an intricate system of rewards and punishments based entirely on sexual performance. Women who pleased him received jewels, better quarters, elevated status. Those who disappointed him faced public humiliation or physical punishment. The psychological manipulation was systematic. He'd promise marriage to multiple concubines simultaneously, knowing only one could become his official wife. He'd create tests where women competed against each other for his favor, often requiring them to violate their own personal boundaries and cultural taboos. Sexual compliance became the currency through which women purchased basic human dignity. As Ibrahim's demands intensified, palace records document requests that even experienced courtesans found disturbing. Preferences for specific ages that pushed legal and moral boundaries. Requirements for acts that left the court chroniclers, men who'd served in the harem administration for decades, noticeably reluctant to provide details. His appetites seemed to grow more extreme with each passing month, as if normal pleasure could no longer penetrate the psychological armor trauma had built around him. The empire began feeling the strain within 2 years. Gold that should have funded military campaigns purchased silk sheets from China. Resources meant for border fortifications were diverted to construct new chambers for Ibrahim's experiments. The imperial treasury, once the envy of European monarchs, started showing deficits directly traceable to harem expenses. Meanwhile, Persian forces reclaimed territory in the east. Venetian ships challenged Ottoman naval supremacy in the Mediterranean. Habsburg spies sent reports to Vienna describing an empire whose sultan spent war councils detailing his sexual fantasies instead of discussing troop movements. But the true horror was still coming. Because in 1644, a whisper would reach Ibrahim's ears that would trigger the most shocking massacre in Ottoman history. The woman's name was Sheker Sugar, and her intentions were anything but sweet. In the toxic atmosphere of the imperial harem, where 300 women competed for the attention of a psychologically unstable ruler, jealousy had evolved into something far more dangerous. Sheker approached Ibrahim with devastating news. One of his concubines had betrayed him. Someone had allowed a man into the forbidden quarters. Someone had violated the sacred trust of the Sultan's bed. For Ibrahim, this wasn't merely adultery. It was cosmic violation, an attack on the very foundation of his masculine identity and imperial authority. The harem represented his absolute dominion over female sexuality within the empire's heart. The suggestion that another man had penetrated this space triggered a complete psychological collapse that made his previous excesses look like childish tantrums. The investigation began immediately, and it revealed the full extent of Ibrahim's paranoia. Women were dragged from their beds in the middle of the night for interrogations that combined psychological manipulation with physical brutality. They were isolated, starved, deprived of sleep, subjected to temperature extremes designed to break their resistance. Some were forced to watch their friends undergo increasingly severe punishments, creating a climate of terror that infected every corner of the harem. But the interrogations produced no confessions. Either the women genuinely knew nothing about any betrayal, or their loyalty to each other proved stronger than their fear of Ibrahim's wrath. This silence didn't calm the Sultan. It convinced him that a conspiracy of silence protected the guilty party. And if he couldn't identify the one guilty woman, he would eliminate them all. The logic was simple, terrible, and absolutely consistent with Ibrahim's fractured psychology. Every concubine except his highest-ranking wives would die. Their deaths would serve as both punishment and purification of his contaminated domain. The Bosphorus would provide the perfect solution. Its deep waters had swallowed countless Ottoman secrets throughout history. Bodies weighted with stones would sink into darkness, leaving no evidence. The official story would claim a tragic accident during a pleasure cruise. On the appointed night, Ibrahim's guards moved through the harem like angels of death. They gathered women from their chambers, telling them they were being relocated to new quarters. Some suspected the truth and tried to resist, but armed men quickly subdued any opposition. Others went willingly, believing they were being granted freedom or transferred to provincial palaces. The procession moved through Topkapi's corridors in complete silence. No drums, no prayers. These women were simply being erased from history, their names struck from every record as if they'd never existed. Even the palace chroniclers who documented everything from menu choices to weather patterns left this night blank in their official accounts. At the water's edge, the true horror unfolded. Each woman was bound and weighted with stones, silk robes becoming burial shrouds. The process was methodical, efficient, carried out by men specifically chosen for their ability to follow orders without question. These weren't soldiers driven by battle fury or zealots motivated by ideology. They were bureaucrats of death, performing administrative murder with Ottoman precision. The psychological impact on the victims was devastating. They understood their fate, but remained powerless to prevent it. Some begged for mercy. Others maintained dignified silence. A few cursed Ibrahim's name as the waters closed over their heads. The guards worked through the night, disposing of human beings like refuse, while the Sultan waited in his chambers for confirmation that his will had been done. Contemporary accounts suggest only one woman survived. A passing fisherman supposedly pulled her from the water after she cut through her bonds. But even this detail remains disputed. If she lived, she never spoke publicly about what she witnessed, perhaps understanding that survival depended on silence. Ibrahim showed no remorse. He expressed satisfaction that his harem had been purified, and within days began planning to replenish his collection of women, sending agents across the empire to acquire fresh concubines. 300 deaths meant nothing beyond the inconvenience of rebuilding his sexual inventory. But the massacre created problems Ibrahim's damaged mind couldn't comprehend. The imperial harem wasn't just a pleasure palace, it was a complex social and economic institution employing thousands of people. Suddenly, eliminating most of its population created administrative chaos that rippled through the entire palace system. Rumors spread through Constantinople. Palace servants whispered about missing women. Families demanded answers. Foreign diplomats reported strange stories to their governments. Ibrahim's attempt to hide his crimes only drew more attention, creating scandals that weakened royal authority across the empire. The financial costs were equally catastrophic. Ibrahim had destroyed millions of gold pieces worth of human property in a single night. Each concubine represented years of investment in training, clothing, maintenance. The economic impact strained the imperial budget precisely when the empire faced military challenges on multiple fronts, and Ibrahim's mental state continued deteriorating. The massacre hadn't satisfied his paranoid fears, it had intensified them. He began suspecting betrayal everywhere, seeing conspiracies in routine palace interactions, interpreting administrative delays as evidence of sabotage. His ability to govern, already compromised by sexual obsessions, collapsed entirely under the weight of murderous guilt and expanding delusions. The end came on August 8, 1648. The Janissaries, the empire's elite military corps, revolted, tearing Ibrahim's Grand Vizier to pieces in the streets of Constantinople. The Sultan, who had drowned 300 women to satisfy his paranoid jealousy, was strangled with a bowstring, his body dumped in an unmarked grave. His 8-year reign had transformed the world's mightiest empire into a cautionary tale about absolute power corrupted by sexual obsession and unhealed trauma. The archives preserved everything: treasury records showing the staggering expenditures, architectural plans revealing the hidden chambers, diplomatic correspondence documenting the empire's decline. But they couldn't preserve the screams, the terror, the moment when 300 women understood they were about to die for a crime that probably never happened. Those sounds vanished into the Bosphorus, along with everything else Ibrahim tried to drown. What remains is a question that echoes through the marble corridors of Topkapi Palace. How many civilizations have been destroyed not by external enemies, but by the internal collapse of a single damaged mind, given absolute power? The water keeps its secrets, but the stones remember. And somewhere in the depths of the Bosphorus, weighted down by Ottoman gold, 300 women who should have had names, stories, lives, they remember too.